All right, so let's get into season one, episode seven of The Last of Us. This episode is called Left Behind. This was another fantastic episode. I know I keep saying that, and I probably sound like a broken record, but I think this is just a very well done show. It's a great adaptation of a video game. Again, the best adaptation of a video game I've probably ever seen. This episode is actually based off of DLC content called Left Behind, the same name, that came out when the video game came out originally in 2013. And it tells kind of a little bit more of Ellie's backstory before she was, bit by one of the infected. And this kind of tells that story of how that happened. I thought this was a great episode. Again, spoiler free. I would definitely recommend this episode. And I'm going to get into in this review. I'm going to talk about some of the plot points of this episode and get into some spoilers here. And then I'm going to look at some of the insights from the podcast and inside the episode, and then talk about the game versus show comparison. So that's basically what this review will look like. So let's go ahead and head into the plot points for this episode. Basically, Ellie, it picks up where it left off in the last episode, where Joel was stabbed with a shard of the baseball bat, and now Ellie's managed to bring him into this like abandoned house and is trying to care for him, and he's basically telling her to leave, like get out of here, go back to Tommy, like I'm not going to make it, and Ellie's not having it. She swears at Joel. She doesn't know what to do, but she wants to stay there with him, and you can see that their relationship is really starting to grow. And then as Ellie's struggling with this decision, we flash back to her at Fedra Military School, basically, and she's running laps in a gym and has a Walkman on and everything. And we see that she gets into this fight with one of her schoolmates. Because she knocked the headphones off of Ellie's head and challenges her in that way. And, she's basically like, one thing that she says is, you don't fight, your friend fights for you, and she's not here. And that's referencing the Riley character, who has been gone for a few weeks and was Ellie's roommate and best friend and everything. But Ellie fights back. She decides to fight here, which is kind of a theme in this episode of continuing the fight, that leads all the way into what happens at the end of the episode, and it kind of comes back around with Joel and everything. So here, Ellie's basically, sitting in the principal's office, and he's telling her that she has basically a couple options. One option is she can end up keep getting thrown back in the hole, not following the rules, and she ends up, doing one of the dirtier jobs for Fedra, or she can use her intelligence and her abilities to become an officer. And she's kind of struggling with that decision. And we also get some interesting shots of things in Ellie's room. We see the No Pun Intended book that kind of goes back to one of the earlier episodes where she was telling Joel those pun jokes and everything. We see the comic book that she reads also in her room, and a Mortal Kombat 2 poster, which is a nice setup for a moment that happens later in the episode, in the arcade, actually. But Ellie's best friend and roommate Riley has been missing for a few weeks, but she comes in and surprises Ellie and returns, and she talks about how she joined the Fireflies, basically, and Ellie can't believe she joined. And a lot of this episode is just kind of this philosophical argument about Fedra versus the Fireflies, and Ellie kind of sides with Fedra a little bit, saying something to the effect of, they're kind of the glue that holds everything together. If we didn't have Fedra, everything would be in chaos, nobody would be getting fed, all those things. But then on the other side of that, Riley's trying to say, well, the Fireflies are basically freedom fighters. They're fighting for freedom, and she was calling Fedra fascists, basically. So a lot of this is their kind of back and forth banter about Fedra versus the Fireflies and those different ideologies. one of the things that stood out to me is, Riley basically takes Ellie to this place, and she takes her. We find out it's the mall, and she's taking her there to just have a nice night and everything together because she's eventually going to reveal this information that she's leaving. But one thing I really enjoyed was seeing Ellie like hit the flashlight to get it to work, because that's something that you have to do in the video game. You actually have to like hit your controller or tilt it and hit it off your hand to try to get the flashlight to work, which I thought was a nice little nod to the video game. Um, we also find out that there recently has there's now power in the mall, and Ellie's kind of fascinated by that, and we get this really cool shot of the mall just lighting up and all the stores and shops lighting up and all the neon colors and everything, and I thought that was just a really cool shot from this episode. And Riley basically wants to show Ellie the four wonders of the mall. And one of those, whether intended or not, is the escalator. Ellie's absolutely fascinated by the escalator, and she calls it the electric stairs and and everything. So that was, we have a character here who hasn't seen a lot of these things. She's grown up in a Fedra school, military school. So another one of these four wonders of the mall is this carousel that they ride on, and again, I feel like this episode was once again a very very good adaptation um, from like the game to this episode with the DLC content and everything. So many of these moments were I remembered vividly from the game. We also get them visiting the photo booth and taking pictures in there. And as you can see, if you're watching the YouTube video, um, it's pretty similar that they're in this photo booth and taking silly pictures and everything. So that was a nice moment too. Um, the the other wonders of the mall are the arcade, and once they go into the arcade, that's where Ellie gets to play Mortal Kombat 2. So again, it kind of ties back to that poster, and she obviously is obsessed with this game and gets to play it and everything. Um, and then the last thing that they go into is this horror store, where they put on these masks and everything. But before that even happens, Riley basically tells Ellie that Marlene, and again, that's a callback to the Marlene character we saw in episode one, who's the leader of the Fireflies. She's sending her to the Atlanta QZ, and Riley basically brought Ellie to the mall to say goodbye. And Riley is while Ellie is kind of different in this way because she didn't necessarily have a family that she remembers, Riley did have a family that she remembers from before all of this. And she's seeking that connection with that family, and she's finding that with the Fireflies. Um, and this whole episode really shows this connection that Riley and Ellie have, and it's kind of like this whole will they won't they type of thing with their relationship. Is it more than friendship? And of course, like any good thing that happens in this show, there's always something really terrible that happens after that really good thing for the characters happens. So these two characters have share this kiss, and they've had this night together, and then right after that they get attacked by one of the infected. And this is where we see where Ellie gets bit. And because we didn't see that before episode one, or in episode one, or in any of the other episodes until this point. Now we see how she got bit in the first place, and Riley also gets bit, and so they're basically just sitting there kind of consoling each other, trying to figure out what they're going to do. Are they going to take the easy way out like Frank and Bill did? Um, but that's not what Riley wants to do. Riley tells Ellie that she doesn't want to give up or take the easy way out. She wants to enjoy the time she has with Ellie, whether it's 2 hours or 2 days, I think is what she says. And it's really this flashback that prompts Ellie not to give up on Joel. And at the end of the episode, she ends up finding a needle and thread and tries to stitch him up because she's determined, Riley didn't give up on me. I'm not going to give up on you. And it's this flashback that really pushes her to what she does at the end of the episode. She's not going to leave Joel at this point. She's going to try whatever she can to save him and stay with him for whatever time they have together. So a very cool episode that pushes the story forward by going into the past, which is always cool. And a little more insight into this episode from the Last of Us podcast and inside the episode. Again, I mentioned that this episode is based off DLC content that came out. There was no cold open for this episode, and they kind of asked the question, "What does this episode want?" So it's an interesting question to ask. This episode apparently didn't want a cold open, so there wasn't one. Originally, this episode wasn't going to tie into what was going on with Joel at the beginning and end. It was just going to stand alone as this Left Behind story based on the DLC. But HBO suggested they should have that story with Joel in there to tie things together, which I agree. I think that was the right move. You see Joel in the beginning and end of this episode, and this flashback kind of informs what the character Ellie does. So I think that was the right choice. This episode also intentionally shows a different side of Fedra. We've seen the really evil side of Fedra, the bad side of them. But Ellie again even describes them kind of as the glue holding things together, and it shows this different side of Fedra. And basically, how Neil Druckmann summed this up, he said this episode is basically the post-apocalyptic version of skipping school. So I want to get into finally before I end this review, I want to get into those comparisons, the game versus TV comparisons. And again, this was a very faithful adaptation of the DLC content, and you're going to see that, especially if you're watching on YouTube. You're going to see how close some of these things were. First of all, we see Ellie taking care of Joel in this scene right here, as she's trying to patch him up and do what she can for him to put pressure on the wound. And we see that that's happening. We also see that in this next scene, Riley comes in and surprises Ellie in a similar way in both the show and the game. In this comparison, we see the carousel scene in both the show and the game, and how similar they are. This, again, was a big part of the game. So there's the reveal of the carousel in the game. And here's the scene from the photo booth. You can see the game here first and then the show. So in this comparison, we see the arcade, Raha's arcade in both the game and the show. And again, just like the neon colors and everything really stands out here. And Ellie plays the Mortal Kombat game and in the driving game in both the show and the game. Pretty cool. Here we see the characters going into the horror shop or the Halloween store or whatever it is, and they're trying on the wolf and the clown masks and dancing on top of the counter and everything. In the game, they dance without the masks on, and in the show they dance with them on. But it's very, again, a very similar scene. Here we see the reveal of the bite mark and how that happens in both the game and the show. And finally, in this scene between Riley and Ellie, there's very similar dialogue as they're, talking about, as Riley's saying, let's wait it out, whether it's 2 hours or 2 days, and that whole dialogue. They decide that they're gonna wait it out together, and until the end here. So that's pretty much where the episode and our comparisons end. And that was episode 7 of The Last of Us, and going into episode 8. As I said earlier on the show, in the news segment, we're going to see Troy Baker, who played Joel. He's going to come into the live action TV show and be in a different role. So it'll be interesting to see him in episode 8. But What did you guys think of The Last of Us Episode 7 Left Behind? Let me know in the comments section, and stay tuned to the weekly POV for your weekly Last of Us reviews.